Hello, this is your host Akhil Navluri, and welcome to the brand new episode of the Techospace podcast series. In this podcast episode, here with me, I have one of the most eminent and prominent industry leaders pertaining to the IT space, Mr. Rob Kenefeck, who happens to be the principal consultant of the company ControlPlane. And along with that, I've got a surprise for you. He's even the president of the Toastmasters initiative that we are going to talk about as we head on with the podcast session. Now, talking about Rob and me, we are based out of the same location from Melbourne as well. And I'm based out of the western suburbs of Melbourne from Tarneit, and Rob is based out of Port Melbourne. So, I mean, I'm just looking for this Melbourne connect again. A lot of similarities and relatability on account here. So, Rob, welcome to my podcast session. So, how are you doing, and how was the rest of your week like?
Very good. Thanks, Akhil. Yeah, I've just had a very busy weekend and I'm enjoying the Melbourne sunshine at the moment.
Brilliant, brilliant. I mean, yeah, it's pretty rare, sometimes to see the Melbourne sunshine too consistent, and it's always a rarity there.
Well, we're in early spring, so while there's sunshine outside, it's still very cold. But
Yeah,
today seems like one of those beautiful spring days, clear skies, warm sunshine. It always brings a smile to my face when it's springtime.
absolutely, absolutely. I totally understand like what you're trying to say. Yeah. So, Rob, as the clock ticks now, so at the stroke of this hour, which is 12:18 p.m. Melbourne time, let's kick off with the podcast session. All right then. Okay, Rob. So I'm pretty keen to understand this. Like, how did you start your journey in tech, and what are one of the biggest lessons that you have learned along the way?
Thanks, Akhil. My career in tech started a long time ago. I'd like to talk about how my career started as a small child, visiting my grandparents' house. My grandfather had a very, very old PC, and I used to go around there to play games, Prince of Persia or Lemmings on his PC. Those early memories of going and playing on my grandfather's PC were interspersed with memories of playing with a laptop, a Windows 3.1 laptop that my grandmother had. She used it to type some notes and maybe make some memoir memories. But I used to sit there and I found that I could write batch programs to do very simple, basic things, but still batch programs. Those early memories of using those devices as a 10-year-old, they stuck with me. And when my own family decided to get a PC, I remember my dad getting a magazine, the Computer Weekly magazine. In the magazine would be lots of different articles talking about websites, and anything that I found interesting, I would highlight. And at the end of the week, I'd give the magazine to my dad, who'd go away and whitelist those websites on the computer and monitor my connectivity time so that I'd be able to go and visit those websites.
All
To
right.
me, that's one of the earliest memories that I've got about access control and secure computing being applied, was me having to highlight the websites that I wanted to use or go to in my on my dad's computer.
All
So
right.
those early forming memories of being in tech led me to do something very interesting.
All right.
I, as a student at school, had the opportunity to do an industrial placement, and everyone in the school had their opportunity to do an industrial placement. On my weekends, I'd go to computer fairs and pick up hardware. So I thought it was only sensible for me to do an industrial placement based on that IT space, that IT industry. Thinking back to the childhood times of computers and getting on the internet. So I was refurbishing laptops, refurbishing desktop computers, and getting valuable work experience through this 2 weeks. We had to interview for it. We had to apply for the role. And my kind of childhood experience got me into that job. What did I learn from doing that? Well, I learned a lot. Mostly I learned that people throw away a lot of really valuable IT equipment into skips and bins. And I started my own enterprise as a 15-year-old, finding IT equipment like laptops and computers in bins and refurbishing them to then sell on. Sure, it might take 5 or 10 broken laptops that I scrummaged from different skips before I
Wow.
could make one laptop that I would sell. But by being able to, by having the skills to break things down, to test and evaluate whether the components were any good or not, I was able to pull together one working laptop at the end of those 10 computers that I got, and I'd be able to sell that. Now, I say this as a small enterprise because I had no idea what I was doing. I had no sales or marketing skills. My client base was my friends at school or their families.
How cute. That's pretty
Which,
modest.
very modest, very, very basic, but it was still enough for me to start learning lessons about the value of goods, the value of things that people threw away. And that really kind of expired, that really got me going with a degrees of interest in what computing could be, because I could see that it didn't just have to be the traditional computing industry that I got into. I could get into that refurbishment work. I wasn't a salesperson though, so I eventually found that I wasn't selling to anyone because I'd sold to all of my friends who could afford it. But what I did find is that people were asking me for my expertise. They were asking me for my knowledge and my skills. And so my Rob's Computers business that I created for this turned into more of a help people fix things or help people build websites. And I continued this through university. University, I studied computer science, and I continued to help people with websites and IT migrations from one device to another device, just through that word of mouth. Again, no sales skills, no marketing skills, just knowing people who knew people and people knew of my reputation. But like most students at university, doing these kind of odd jobs and running my own enterprise, as it were, wasn't enough. So I needed to do other jobs as well. I could talk about varieties of jobs that I did. And like many students, I did so many things. Akil, you must have done your own fair share of jobs as well, right? Have you've done those weird jobs as a student?
I mean, not exactly as a student, but when before I actually came into the IT industry, I was, doing some cold calling and, doing some marketing campaigning. So that was my taste of, having the odd job thing going on.
Yeah, that cold calling. So I ended up, one of the jobs that I did, I was door-to-door selling, and I was selling render for brickwork for people's houses. And I picked up this job because I thought it would be interesting, and they were taking anyone on. They gave me 2 and a bit hours of training in the morning about what the render was and what their target clients were and what people might need to do. And then they put me on a minibus, drove me to a suburb, and they just let us loose. We basically walked up and down the streets, going door to door, knocking to see who was there and to see whether they needed render for their buildings. I discovered very early on through this process that I was not your typical salesperson, because I listened and I paid attention through everything that they told us in that morning session. I learned everything that I could about that render in the 2.5 hours we had. And so I was replaying that back to these potential customers, these people whose doors I'd just knocked on. I built great rapport with them, but I didn't get a single lead of someone who wanted or needed the render. And so the supervisor of the shift at the time, he said, "Rob, I don't get it. How are you failing to get any leads?" So he
Oh,
decided that he was going to tag along with me, and he came along to the next 5 houses that I went to. And he just listened, and he was passively part of the conversation, agreeing with the technical points that I put forward, but he didn't talk too much. And then we changed positions. And for the next 5 houses, I was there as his backup while he showed me how he did it. And I hated it because he didn't listen to what the customer wanted or what their needs were or what their requirements were. He just wanted to sell them a product. And out of those 5 houses that he showed me how to do, 3 of them signed up and became leads, which meant he got commission at the end of the day, and I got no commission. But I couldn't bring myself to be that kind of salesperson, because he said to me as we walked away from a house, it doesn't matter what that person wants. They had a need. I know that if they sign up for this product, they're going to get a better product. They might not have the money for it, and they might not solve the actual problem that they were discussing with us, but we've sold them a product and everyone's happy. That's not the kind of salesperson I ever wanted to be. So I learned from that university time that I'm not your typical schmarmy salesperson that does that. But it
exactly.
did lead me on to other jobs, and I got a job on a service desk. So I had known the company. My sister and a few friends worked for this company, so I'd socialized with this entire service desk, which made it very easy for me to get a role there, especially part-time and flexible around my university hours. Instead of going door to door, people were coming to me, and I was much more comfortable with people coming to me with problems. Working on a service desk, you have to answer the phone, and when you answer the phone, someone tells you what's wrong, which I love. I love it when people can be really clear and concise with me. Well, this is the problem, because then I can start solving it, and I love solving problems. So working on a service desk builds in that kind of level of thinking, that analysis, and the skills that you might require to understand a problem. But it also allowed me to start doing automation. And how do you do automation when you're working on a service desk? Well, I was working for a company who had multiple stores, and each of those stores would have IT problems, but they'd have the same infrastructure and the same servers with the same software. And the problems that they all faced were very, very consistent. And it was normally a standard way of fixing each of those problems. So what would I do is I wrote a script. Every time I experienced a problem, I'd write down how we solved it, or I'd make sure that the wiki page was up to date with how to solve it. Once I'd solved it once, if I got a phone call about it again, I'd know that I knew how to solve it, and I would write a script to be able to solve it for the third, fourth, and every time past that, which meant as soon as I could identify what the problem was, I had a script pre-prepared, ready to go, a bash script, that I could connect to their server, run the bash script, solve the problem for them, and they loved me. Why did they love me? Well, because it took them far less time being on the phone, staying away from their customers to resolve their IT issues if they got me on the end of the line, because I automated some of that work away. And I still talk about this when I teach DevOps courses. I talk about automating toil, those manual efforts that people do. That's a fundamental part of DevOps. And I remember back to those days of writing bash scripts so that I never had to solve the same problem twice. Between all of my service desk work, I took a career break.
Okay.
I went and became a ski instructor, which for most people is a very random thing. Have you ever done anything different like that, Akil? No, it's
Exactly.
taking that complete break from everything that you know and doing something completely different is a very refreshing experience. So I graduated at the end of my degree. I gave up all of the jobs that I was doing. I gave up Rob's computers. I dropped all of my client base, and I went to Canada. And in Canada, I got taught to be a ski instructor. One of the first things you learn as a ski instructor is how to assess people and understand what kind of problems you might be dealing with. So someone walking across the snow to you with their skis in one hand and their gloves and their goggles in another hand, you see how they walk. You see whether they're sliding all over the place. You see whether they're on time or whether they're late or whether they're early. You start to pick up so many different things that you can see and assess in what people do, which I then took those skills and I went back. At the end of my ski season, I got a phone call from someone in Australia saying, "Rob, have you got any work coming up? Are you free?" They'd heard about me. They knew my work effort. They knew my work ethic. And they were working on a project in Australia for the same company that I'd been working for before. So they knew that I knew the systems. They knew that I knew the technology. And they said to me, "Come over. It'll just be for 3 months. Come to Australia for 3 months. You can have a nice holiday with it. Come over and work on our project. And after you've worked on the project, you can go backpacking or traveling around Australia before you go back for the next ski season in Canada." And I said, "This is a great idea. Let's do it. All expenses paid trip. I get to go and work." They sorted out my visa. I came in on a working holiday visa, stayed with someone I knew, worked for 3 months. But what I discovered is that projects never take the amount of time people think they're going to take. So working in the real world, a project always takes longer. So that 3 months turned into 5 months. And at the end of the 5 months, I still had so much more that I could do, so much more that I could give, that they decided they could extend my contract and I could delay my next ski season. I'd still get some backpacking in. I could backpack my way around Australia and Southeast Asia for a couple of months while they resolved some visa issues that they needed to resolve for me.
All right.
They got me onto a sponsored business visa in Australia. While I traveled around Southeast Asia and the continent, I went back to the UK and went to some music festivals in the UK and saw all my friends who I'd said, don't worry, I'm coming back to the UK. I'll just be away for a year and then I'll be back again. And I got back to them and told them, no, I've got this job. I'm going to work in Australia for the next little while. Then I'm going to go back to Canada again. And they all said, Rob, you're never coming back. We know you're never coming back. And they were right, to be honest. But I never realized that I was never coming back. So having done this extension, this backpacking, and done this short project, I ended up working at this company for a very long time, working my way through different roles from service desk to project delivery. And the variety of skills that I picked up and the different projects I worked on and the different opportunities that were available for me included doing things like being a Google guide and driving projects and updating hardware and software for various different things. And one of those projects that I got put onto was a global project where they were updating an application that everyone used to do what they needed to do. By this point, I was starting to look after about 15,000 computers. I was responsible for the hardware across nearly 400 retail stores. And in each of those stores, they had a computer or had multiple computers. And when the user needed to use the application, they'd go to that computer and load the application. I was working with the global team, and the global team said to me that we've actually got a new way of doing this. We'll be able to use something called Docker, and we can put the application into Docker and we can run it and test it and do everything else we need. Because we were already dealing with 2 different versions of the operating system, with a 3rd version coming up around the corner. We were dealing with different ages of hardware. So the computers that we were having to test for, the test effort that we were having to put in, was starting to span across multiple different devices. Have you ever used an old computer and had to use the same application on it as you do on a new computer? It runs differently, right? You must have seen that.
It is,
yeah. And so when it runs differently, the experience that the end user gets can be different. And Docker brought this new concept, this new way of working, and we were able to take the application, it was a Java application, we were able to bundle it into a Docker container, we were able to isolate the different libraries and binaries that it was using and be able to distribute it and move it around. So I learned a whole different suite of skills, those DevOps skills that we were starting to deal with by doing this project.
Okay.
There's so many things that you can learn doing a project like that, and I took them all away with me. But what I did do is I started going to conferences and meetups to talk about containerizing an application and how we were scaling it and how we were orchestrating it. And at one of those conferences, I heard about this thing called Kubernetes. It was 2017. Kubernetes had not been around for very long. It had definitely not been around in Australia. And so they were introducing the concept of it through various different conferences. And I listened to the information that I heard and went, nah, Kubernetes, I don't need to worry about that. That's not for me. Why wasn't it for me? Well, I had my users. My users walked to a computer, they clicked on an icon, and the application loaded up. That was the orchestration. That was the scheduling that we needed to do. And Kubernetes starts to deal with that problem at scale. Australia doesn't deal with scale so much with Kubernetes, and certainly in my instance, 15,000 devices wasn't a big enough scale to worry about when each user would be the orchestrator and the scheduler, and they'd load it on the computer that they needed to be standing in front of when they used the software. So I decided that Kubernetes wasn't for me, which was a big mistake. And the lesson that you might learn from that is that ignoring a new technology because it doesn't apply to you isn't always going to do you any favors in the future. It's why now I start to teach myself about AI, even when I'm not directly using AI, because understanding new technologies and understanding how they might have an implication in your workplace sets you up for the future. By ignoring Kubernetes, when I moved on to my next job, finally out of that large company that I was in, I started a role as a head of platform engineering. I ran the platform for a small team of people. There were 5 people in my team, but part of the platform included Kubernetes. And so suddenly I went from never having to worry about it because my orchestrator was a real person to having to understand this technology and run a team and manage a team of people for whom this technology was the main thing. At the time, Kubernetes had 4 major releases every year. So we were running our own vanilla Kubernetes cluster, self-installed, not running through a cloud provider, not running through any kind of other system, which meant we had to test 4 major releases of the Kubernetes platform every year. And we had to make sure that it integrated with our storage platform, and we had to make sure that it integrated with our database platform. And we had to understand how all of these different things fit together and understand the security implications of them as well. That's not an easy challenge. And even with a team of 5 people, we were constantly busy staying up to date. There's plenty of options now for doing that differently. And I talk to clients all the time in my current role about being able to make choices, making good technical decisions about how much maturity you've got and what level of complexity you need to go to. But I learned a lot of that the hard way. And learning Kubernetes the hard way by doing the stuff is the way that the information sticks, certainly in my brain, the best. But I only lasted in that job for about a year. There was a number of reasons why I didn't want to stay. And when it was time for me to move on, I was talking to a recruiter. And I was talking to a recruiter about what it was that I enjoyed and what kind of roles I might be looking for and what kind of tasks that I might be looking to do in my everyday. I was looking for technical variety. I was looking to solve bleeding edge problems, and I was looking to use my kind of vast experience and my variety of experience, especially with that ski instructing component brought into it as well. And I wanted to use all of these things that I'd learned throughout my career, all the way back to what I was doing as a child with access control, highlighting things in a Computer Active weekly magazine so that I could get access to a website. And they said to me, you should think about consulting. And so I became a consultant because of that. The process for me to get to being a consultant is fascinating as well. And I'm sure you and many of your listeners, they've all gone through job interviews. And some of those job interviews might include a technical challenge. Have you done a technical challenge for a job interview before?
I did.
Yeah. So with a technical challenge, someone sets a problem and you have to solve it. And the technical challenge they gave me when I was joining this consultancy was to run an application. I think it was a web application of sorts. They didn't want to give me the hows or the whys. They didn't determine what technology I had to use. All they said is, here's the repository, the GitHub repository for the application. Here's the requirements for how you'd run it. It's up to you to make it work. And so I had to make a decision about what technology I was going to choose to make that happen. And I decided to myself there and then, I'm going to use Kubernetes. Kubernetes is still a relatively unknown player in the Australian marketplace, but it's something that I had skills in. So I wanted to use the skills that I had to demonstrate my capabilities to this potential new employer. I didn't manage to get it working fully in the end, but I submitted it anyway as part of the technical challenge and went, I don't know what's going to happen next. Turns out the company only had one other person with Kubernetes skills. So they only had one person who could even review my technical submission. So they didn't worry that it didn't fully work or wasn't completely bulletproof. I later learned, having got the job with that consultancy, how to review and interview people and how to look at people's technical challenges and assess them. Part of that assessment isn't just about, does it work? Did they achieve the stated goals and the outcomes? It's, did they make sensible decisions? Did they make clear, definable decisions about what they were doing? Did they demonstrate that they could use Git and that they could use good Git practices, frequently checking code in, making comments, making sure everything was clear and understandable? And could they talk about and demonstrate learning of the problems that they'd encountered in it? So it was a self-timed assessment. They told me I had a couple of hours to do it, and it was up to me to do what I could do in those hours. But they didn't restrict the number of hours that I could have spent. I could have spent weeks fine-tuning this and doing whatever I needed to do. But the lesson that they wanted to test or prove was that you can do very much in a short period of time, but there's always going to be things that you can do better. And they wanted to see that you had that self-reflection processing to be able to learn from what didn't work in the short period of time that you had to improve how you do it for the next time. And that was a skill that I picked up and carried on for years after getting into consulting. But as the only person who could review my Kubernetes work, they were pretty clear that they needed someone like me in the company.
Okay.
When I got in and I was doing Kubernetes type consulting, one of the first things that I discovered is that most people didn't understand the basics about Kubernetes. So I started teaching my fellow consultants about the basics of Kubernetes. By giving them this 101 guide, they would understand the terminology, they'd understand the pros and cons of it, and they would know who they should be calling every time they got a client who said, we should be installing Kubernetes, or we should be deploying this using Kubernetes.
Yeah.
So I built a reputation about going in for other consultants who are working somewhere who had a client or a potential client who might need to use Kubernetes.
Makes sense.
This continued building on my skill set. So my skill set was Kubernetes. And while I wasn't the most amazing when I started, I kept getting all of this different exposure to various different problems, being able to assess whether Kubernetes was the right fit or was not the right fit. And in most cases, Kubernetes was not the right fit. And I got to be the person that went in and said, no, you're dreaming. You haven't got the maturity. You haven't even started containerization yet. You haven't got the technical platform in order to start operating a Kubernetes cluster. And so I said no to more people than I ever said yes to about whether Kubernetes was right. Being able to give them a roadmap, though, of something that was different, being able to give them the cloud native approach, they were so thrilled. Have you ever been told no for something, but been told actually there's a better solution for you? Most people only hear the no and they stop thinking or stop listening.
Yeah.
But I was able to convey this message in such a way that it got people excited about the alternatives. While I said no to Kubernetes, I said yes to cloud native development. So they might be able to use their existing server infrastructure and apply cloud native practices and technologies to their own existing infrastructure, saving them heaps of money, but actually solving the problem that they had that they needed to solve. I liken that back to my time going door to door and trying to find people who wanted render on their brickwork, when I wouldn't sell them the render if it wasn't the right thing for them. That's the important part for me about finding the right solution for the right people. I eventually moved on from that consultancy for a few different reasons, not least of which was I got a message from a recruiter at ControlPlane, which triggered me. Like, when you receive a message, you normally want to feel pleasant and warm feelings. But this recruiter talked about DevSecOps. And I listened to what they said in the message, or like read what they said in the message. And I'm like, no, I have to talk to this recruiter to tell them why they shouldn't be talking about DevSecOps. As someone who'd been teaching DevOps, security is a fundamental part. And while I still don't like that DevSecOps terminology, I really do understand why it's there as a marketing strategy to make people think more about the security that should be fundamental. So I learned from that kind of consulting flow that solving problems isn't always the right answer, that security is fundamental to DevOps. And just because someone triggers you with a LinkedIn message doesn't mean you should stop thinking about that. And I think that's probably a fairly in-depth insight now into how I got from being that small child playing with a Windows 3.1 laptop and writing batch scripts to the principal consultant that I am now.
That's an amazing and a beautiful journey, Rob. Now, Rob, I mean, we just touched upon the point. Let's say you touched upon the point of, control plane and let's say being a principal consultant. Now I'll go a little bit deeper into that. So Rob, I've tried to understood that you have spent significant amount of your time being the being the principal consultant. Now I wanted to understand like how do you think it is different from being the principal consultant at Control Plane to the previous gigs that you are part of in the past?
Yeah, I think to explain why being a principal consultant at ControlPlane is different to being a principal consultant previously, you have to understand a little bit about ControlPlane. I went from being the person who was there for everyone to talk to about their Kubernetes problems, whether they understood them or not, from being the most knowledgeable person about Kubernetes, not just in the company, but in what I could see of the country as well, to working for a consultancy who are experts in everything Kubernetes, who have been part of that Kubernetes journey and securing that Kubernetes journey for years and years. I now work with maintainers of core cloud native tooling, tools that I only previously thought about or talked about from a high level, I've used this or tried this. I now work with people who wrote and built those tools. I now work with people who set up the working groups or who are fundamental to so many different parts of the cloud native ecosystem as we know it, and who still play major roles in all of those components. Working with people who are technical leads for working groups within the Kubernetes space, and outside of the Kubernetes space within the open source, secure open source community as well. The boss of ControlPlane co-wrote the book on hacking Kubernetes. When you co-wrote the book on how to do something like that, it demonstrates a certain level of expertise and understanding with it. So I went from being a principal consultant, being the most knowledgeable and experienced person in Kubernetes that I could find, to being one of many people. And those many people were all, for the most part, experienced in their own component of cloud native or Kubernetes. I have such a vast collection of people to call on now when I have a problem. People who are talking about the latest release of Kubernetes and approving KEPs within that latest version. I can go and speak to them about what's coming, what's happening, and why it's changing the way it's changing. That, I think, is probably one of the most important parts, the differences between being a principal consultant elsewhere and being a principal consultant at ControlPlane, is that experience that they bring. Now, ControlPlane hosts Capture the Flag events at KubeCon. Have you been to a KubeCon, Akil?
Yes, once I think I've been to. Like that was in, let's say, in correlation with Amazon. So it was like this, Rob, there was Amazon event going on and they were showing the live telecast of a KubeCon that was happening in London. So, we were trying to get the coverage of that.
Yeah, so KubeCons, the two big KubeCon events happen in North America and Europe every year. And for a very long time, ControlPlane has been providing Capture the Flag events for these SEMRI experiences, these conferences that are the peak of everything to do with Kubernetes. And ControlPlane have been providing Capture the Flag events. Now, as a principal consultant, what do I need to do in Australia? Well, part of what I do in Australia is deliver Capture the Flag events for local conferences. I just got back from B-Sides Canberra, running a Kubernetes Capture the Flag there. I've done it at a few other conferences, the Everything Open conference earlier this year in Adelaide. So my role is partially delivering these Capture the Flag events to show people and help teach people that Kubernetes security is more complex than they're aware of. And if they don't understand the core concepts of Kubernetes, that they're going to leave their Kubernetes clusters in a very insecure way. I also deliver training. So I recently trained some of the Australian government in Kubernetes practices.
Oh, wow.
The level of skill that we bring to this industry is pretty top notch. And so as a principal consultant, I get to play part in all aspects of that, from driving the early sales conversations, even though, as we've already discussed, right, I'm not a salesperson. I don't want to sell them the pretty flashy things that most salespeople do. I just like to help solve problems for people and understanding where their problems are. So I go to conferences and I present on stage and I talk to people about all the different things that ControlPlane are doing, and I ask them questions to start understanding what problems people are facing and how we might be able to help solve their problems, or how there might be some open source tooling that I can push them to, or a community of people that I can push them to that might help them solve their problem or talk about their problem. Because for me, getting our entire industry up, especially in Australia and Melbourne, I see a fair amount of this, is trying to build the maturity of it locally so that everyone has that same level of understanding as I do, means that I have to talk about things quite frequently with people.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, Rob, you just put across a point that, you were giving a training to the Australian government, with respect to Kubernetes. Now, Rob, I wanted to understand, like, when you approach the Australian government, or let's say, the government agency, like, what were the changes that you laid upon? Like, what did you feel that, this was the thing that was the sole problem of it, and how did you fix that?
Yeah, so whenever we're reaching out to someone to deliver training, the way that I deal with it is I have a conversation with them first. And I want to understand what it is that they're doing. And I want to understand what they want to achieve by going on a training course, so that we can tailor or customize training to their specific needs or requirements. The Australian government was no different. Understanding what they might be doing with the technology, what their current level of expertise was, and how many people within their team needed or wanted to learn more about Kubernetes. And so I went through the same process with the Australian government as I did for anyone else, provided training at a facility that they were comfortable attending, traveling there myself so that I could give them that in-person training, because I always feel that training delivered through a computer screen, it's okay, but training delivered in person is the premium level of training experience that you're going to get. Because especially
Absolutely.
when you're working with someone like me who is an expert in the field, you get to ask questions and you get to have interactions, and the interactions and the learning that you get from someone's experience happen so much better in person outside of a video call, that having that in-person training is really important.
Exactly. That completely, sums up the point here. Rob. Rob, firstly, like, when I'm pretty curious to ask you this particular question. Like, in person, when we just met, we just got up in the cafe, and in the cafe, I was like, Rob, you know what? I have this particular point which I'm really interested to ask you this, and that is the GSuite Administrator. Now, when we talk about the GSuite Administrator, Rob, I wanted to understand, like what were the type of problems that you were trying to solve, and why do you think that this particular project makes it so interesting and unique?
Yeah, for sure. So GSuite Administrator was, so I helped a company go Google. It was while I was working as a service desk analyst, whether I was still as the analyst or whether I'd moved on, but I was doing that kind of IT help desk type support. And one of the opportunities that was presented to me was to help them go Google and to become a Google guide. Now, going Google, I've been a Google Mail user since it first was launched. So I found someone who was helping share invites, because it used to be, when it first came out, an invite-only mail platform. And I had one of the very first invites because of my connections at university. So I got onto the Google Mail ecosystem very early. And when I was working with this company, they were using a really old, outdated mail system. They wanted to move on from that and had found Google, and Google had said to them, yep, you can do it, but you're going to need to have some of your own internal staff trained up on the platform, and to then help other people within the company use this new way of working. Because when you start using Google Mail or G Suite or Google Apps for Workplace or Google Apps for Business and all the different names that they've gone through over the years, the way that you approach things and the way that you do things is very different. And so they wanted to make sure that there were local guides available to help business users approach their way through it. And that was my role. So I volunteered. I got some training from Google about the product suite, and I went, I already know this, but I still learned some cool and interesting things. I became an administrator, so I was able to change passwords and provide accounts for people. But the most important thing that I was doing was helping people change their daily workflows. So part of that was understanding what did they actually need from a productivity suite. They were used to writing emails and sending an email. They were used to having to put those into different folders in whatever tool they were using. That was their way of organizing themselves. They were used to writing documents and sending the document version 0.1 by email, and then downloading that and having their own version 0.1 on their local machine that they'd start editing, and maybe they'd forget to send that somewhere, or maybe someone else would also pick up a version 0.2 and start doing things. Version control across documents was one of the key things that I helped people with as a G Suite administrator, because getting them to think differently about collaborating in real time online with other users of the document meant that people were able to deliver their work much quicker, much more efficiently by all being in the same working document, making live edits and changes and being able to see what everyone was doing. And that was a feature that even Microsoft at the time had absolutely no hope about competing with. So as the G Suite administrator, I took great delight in working with different people across the business, from the lowest level of people using it on a daily basis with very few technical skills, to the highest level across the business, where I actually had to schedule time to meet with these people on a calendar through their executive assistant, who also didn't know how to use the tooling, so that I could teach the C-suite executive how to use the tool and how to use the calendars that I'd had to schedule myself into. So it was a fantastic way of seeing a tool being deployed across multiple levels of an organization, and being able to use some of my ski instructor skills to communicate with people, being able to work effectively across different levels of responsibility and speak to people based on what they needed to know, not the technical level that I am used to talking at.
Amazing. Now, Rob, if I have to sum this, this journey of yours, and if, the G Suite administrator people, laud you, I would say they can call you the game changer in this particular aspect, because you have, given a lot of reformation, when it comes to helping them understand how to use this particular system, or let's say this technology. Now, Rob, in the conversation, in the midst of the conversation, you were saying that, they told you to get your own internal staff. When you talk about the internal staff, like how many people did you bring along for this particular project?
So the projects that I've worked on, I've always worked with relatively small teams, because I feel that you can do a lot with some core dedicated people. The G Suite Administrator project, there were maybe 10 people in total who were trained up as Google Guides across the globe. So I was working with people in various different countries and collaborating on approaches that we all worked on. But most of the projects that I've worked on, I think I talked about 5 people when I was managing the platform team. I did various things with teams of up to 20 people and leading teams of 20 people. There's an old saying that if you can't feed your team with 2 pizzas, then your team's too big. And I always think back to that and think about meeting sizes and group sizes and work out actually what's the most efficient sized team to deal with. And I still do that to this day when I'm trying to scale out a team or provision a team for various client projects. Is finding a small group of highly capable people is often better than having a massive team of 50 people all going in different directions and unaware of what each other are doing.
That's a pretty beautiful insight on that, Rob. Now, Rob, I mean, all this while, I mean, you just were talking about Kubernetes. Now, I'll add like 3 more, 3 more characters to that, or let's say 3 more actors to that. I'll just personify the technologies to that of actors here. So, on the cheeky side. So I totally understand, Rob, that, you have a complete deep expertise, with respect to, let's say, the GCP, the cloud computing, the DevOps, and then Kubernetes. Now let's go a little bit deeper into this. And now I know my listeners, certain of them might have the familiarization with that, but some of them might not. So to familiarize all of them, and keep them on the same note, how would you, compare between these 4 actors, or let's say these 4 technologies, and and which of these 4 do you think that has had a biggest impact in your life, and what would
Yeah,
that
okay.
be?
So these 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, as you were, of cloud computing, DevOps, GCP, and Kubernetes, they all play different roles across the things that I've done. And I think you should be able to pick out from my history and backstory that they all have an important part there. I can trace DevOps back to my very early childhood, automating tasks on that Windows 3.1 laptop. But at the same time, I got into GCP because of my time as a GSuite administrator. So working with Google and understanding Google meant that when it was time for me to start learning about cloud computing and cloud platforms, my natural affiliation was with Google and their platform. I taught myself AWS, and I eventually learned Azure as well. But I've always been much more closely aligned with the Google methodology and ways of working. And that flows back to another of the horsemen as well of DevOps. So Google have been working about site reliability engineering. They came up with site reliability engineering, which is the how to do DevOps. DevOps is a way of working, and site reliability engineering is a way of implementing that those DevOps practices into what you do. So cloud computing aligns really closely with GCP for me. GCP is where my heart and my home is, but I always have to understand how the things that I can do on Google Cloud Platform apply to AWS and also to Azure and also to the smaller hyperscalers as well. It's important to be able to compare and contrast between them. I've always been closely aligned with Google and got most of my certifications with Google. And tying all of those things together, Google also created and came up with Kubernetes.
Okay.
So Kubernetes runs best on GCP, and the most mature versions of Kubernetes that I've seen in my career have been when I combine GCP and Kubernetes and DevOps methodologies with cloud computing. They're all very separate things, though. You can still do Kubernetes even without knowing anything about GCP. You can still do cloud computing without being on the GCP platform. But I think fundamental to all of them is the DevOps way of working. And that's the ability to break down silos between groups of people, to take your developers and your operations team, make them understand what priorities each of them have, and merge them together so that they work towards an end goal. And if that end goal is to develop something that can run in a Kubernetes platform, that's great. If their end goal is to deploy an application to a cloud provider and they choose GCP as the cloud provider, that's great. If they decide to work together and do something to do with cloud native functionality and do it all on-premise, you're still using that DevOps fundamentals in order to do that. So I would say that DevOps is the kind of platform that everything else comes back to, and the importance of all those other pieces, all those other four horsemen, is based on the practice that is DevOps and the way that people apply DevOps to their workplace.
And I feel that, we have a clear winner here, and that's DevOps from, from Rob's end. All right. So Rob, you just mentioned out that, Kubernetes was actually taken up by GCP. Now, when there is an acquiring of one particular, let's say one particular technology with respect to the other, did you feel that, certain features of Kubernetes was repeated? Let's say I would just, flip that question around. Did you feel that, this particular features of GCP were, prominent in Kubernetes, or was it the other way around? Like, how was the situation there?
So Kubernetes was this technology that Google created, but it wasn't their first iteration at doing container management. And in fact, Google still operates and runs their own container platform internally called Borg. But when they wanted to release this open source tool, Google had gone through and they'd spoken to people at various different Docker conferences. So they had their own internal tool. They'd also learned some lessons from how they open sourced and white papered things previously that led the industry in a different direction. And my view of how Google does Kubernetes is based on the fact that they were very familiar with containerization. They had their own tools and techniques and ways of operating containers at vast scale. And so they made that open source. And when they made it open source, they started to guide the direction that everyone else was going to take on with it. But other teams got involved in that open source initiative as well. So it wasn't just Google driving it in one direction. It was a number of other people doing similar things, getting on board with that direction, steering that direction internally, and providing features and pull requests and change requests to help guide this platform in the right direction. Now, for a period of time, the three cloud providers competed as to who could release Kubernetes versions that were public and open source onto their own platform the quickest. And it wasn't always Google that was the quickest to market, which tells you that there are other teams that are so intimately involved, other cloud providers that are so intimately involved in the changes that are occurring with Kubernetes, that they're able to merge those changes and test those changes on their internal platforms equally as quickly as Google was able to do. So it's not like Google are the only people that do Kubernetes. It's just that they came up with that initial idea, they evangelized it, and enough people backed their view of container orchestration that other container orchestration tools like Docker Swarm were left by the wayside.
So probably there's a dominance of Kubernetes all the way in the containerization space then.
For sure, but much like the domination of any technology in a space is not because that the competitors are not good enough or not sometimes even better. If you think back to VHS and Betamax, that these technology decisions and these flows that the industry follows, they're not necessarily due to the best technology, but just the one that the most people get behind and support and endorse. And that's where Kubernetes really won out, is so many people were in line with the way of thinking that Kubernetes was demonstrating and the benefits and abilities that you got from using Kubernetes, especially when you're trying to do resilient platforms at scale, that more people associated with Kubernetes, and the more people that associated with it, the bigger and bigger it grew, making pretty much all of the other tools very small and niche in terms of who uses them and why you might use them. They still exist to this day, but very few people use them in the same way. And you wouldn't think to go there first unless you've got a very specific use case.
Exactly. If you would personally ask me this, Rob, I feel that every organization has a very different requirement. Sometimes people might use the niche approach of, Kubernetes, or some people might just end up with Docker. But it again depends on their own need and their, their own wish. Sometimes they want to, just keep it pretty simple and they want to use Docker. And, sometimes they would say, okay, we want to invest a little more money and we would use Kubernetes. So that kind of comparison keeps on, pulling up, I would say.
Yeah, and I feel like Docker versus Kubernetes is a bit of a weird kind of comparison to have, because when you're small scale and you're able to run containers just on Docker on a single machine, it makes perfect sense to just be using Docker. Kubernetes applies when you start to introduce large scale and resiliency, and the idea of having an application that you've built through a Docker container image, perhaps, or any kind of container image, and you're running that image on a platform, and you want to make sure that that image is persistent. The application that you put inside the image has a persistent presence across your platform. That's where Kubernetes really plays its strength, is making sure that when you define that you want your application to run, it's going to be running, and it's going to be resiliently running. There's a tax that you have to pay on that, the Kubernetes tax I like to talk about, because to make all of these things work resiliently, you have to be ready to move workloads around and do things and communicate. The amount of communication between Kubernetes nodes is almost insane, the back and forward, just to make sure that they're all aligned. You don't always need to go to that level of complexity for a small scale application that you could just run on 3 or 4 servers, each running Docker, to just have your application available there a few times. So it comes down to the scale and size. And I think in Australia, we're still struggling a little bit with that. I had this conversation with a student on the plane coming back from B-Sides, where they said to me, why don't more people use Kubernetes? And I go, because they don't need to use Kubernetes to achieve their outcome. Kubernetes is a really complex tool. As long as they're using containerization, there's like a hierarchy ladder of complexity. As long as you've started with containerization, you can work your way up the ladder as you need to. As you need to scale bigger, as you need to control more factors of it, as you need to do things that container as a service tooling doesn't allow you to do, that's when you start getting into the realm of Kubernetes, as it were.
Exactly.
But in Australia, we've got a small population across a very large landmass. So the scale that we operate at is not the same as it is in the US or the EU. And it's only when enterprises or companies start thinking about scaling outside of the Australian border, outside of the Asia Pacific region, that's when they start to need the scale and size that Kubernetes allows and enables them to deliver. So it's only a limited number of Australian entities that can do that. But I think more will be getting to that point, and we definitely have a strong market here to push and enable Kubernetes for more businesses.
Absolutely. I always heard about this particular term. I mean, this is very away from tech, and there was something called Cola Wars, and that was between the two giants of the software, the soft drink industry. Now, since we were having the debate about Docker and Kubernetes, I would say very cheekily that, it could be containerization wars between these two, between these two technologies.
You could see that in some ways, but I think containerization is the winner against legacy ways of building software. The containerization wars are won by people using containers rather than using legacy methods of building applications and moving applications around. Monolithic applications, monolithic servers, there's a place for them still, regardless of what happens. But more people need to think about how they containerize their application or their workload or their development base so that you can start moving in different places and moving in different ways and scaling as is appropriate for your business to scale. Being able to do that up front rather than waiting until you're trying to scale out of Australia and into other technology markets and then having to completely re-architect everything that you do makes it much more difficult to keep flowing as your business scales.
Absolutely, Rob. That's a very good point put across. Now, Rob, during our conversation, like when we met in person, I was even keen to ask you this, and you were just mentioning about that again and again. So I wanted to understand, like Rob, like you have a huge passion towards service data mesh and security. So if I would just like to categorize these two, like why do you think that you have that interest? So let's say, what's your drive behind pursuing for these two?
I love service meshes, and I think service meshes bring to the containerization space something that developers were missing. I first heard about service meshes and Istio in particular, again, at a conference. And I remember writing up my opinion piece at the end of the conference, having heard someone talk about how service meshes are the next best thing in the cloud space. And I believed them. I've heard those claims at various different conferences about various different technology things, but I thought that the benefits that a service mesh can bring were sufficient enough for me to go away and start looking at it and start playing with it and start investigating how I can bring it to the various clients that I was working with. That led me into a whole pile of Istio-related development, looking at how we could use Istio more effectively to link different Kubernetes clusters together, how we could make life easier for developers without them having to worry about terminating SSL connections themselves, how you could start building tooling through sidecar loading into some of the applications that developers had and ensure that there was secure communication between different parts of applications that were all on the same mesh. You also start to bring in security there as well by being able to restrict and control network flow between applications running within a Kubernetes cluster. It makes it much easier to limit the blast radius if a application is exposed or breached or someone breaks into it. And so service meshes for me were a great way of doing that. And there's other ways that you can do it within a Kubernetes cluster now that don't involve service meshes. But I think the development and the experience within service meshes really helped me understand that network flow all the way back to what I used to do running network LAN parties for my friends at school. tying people's computers together and understanding what data should or shouldn't be going across that connection, having a service mesh to do that in the kind of distributed cloud ecosystem certainly was something that I was really passionate about learning more about and diving into in a greater way. So I've designed and deployed service meshes for a few of the customers I've had over the years. And I always end up being this point of knowledge where, because it's a complex space, the Envoy proxy can be very confusing for people. And the Envoy proxy is how the Istio service mesh communicates and manages rules about what communication can happen. I've always been able to investigate, troubleshoot, and find the ways around what people needed to do in a service mesh deployment based on that level of understanding. And it's beneficial for me as well, having that knowledge, because not many people do. So I love pulling those skills out and being able to have those conversations with people, especially when they're in their early stages of understanding service meshes and what they might want to do with them, being able to show them how they might be able to replace their old API gateway and some of the features their old API gateway had with what a service mesh can now do instead, distributed across your entire cluster, is a really fun conversation.
Absolutely. Rob, I think I need to take some training from you with respect to, how to do the troubleshooting when any situation arises, because when I was part of my first company, not the cold calling part, but when I moved into a development, actually, there were times when I used to see an error and I used to get panicked. But one of my seniors just suggested, like, don't get panicked, just don't get panicked, just work on it. So, in fact, even if we ever catch up, I would just like to, I just want to, bring out a lot of use cases. And I would say that, where is the troubleshooting part, Rob, that we can, solve? Probably our conversation can go off scene, in our
Yeah,
next
for
meetup.
sure. Troubleshooting is always a fun part of everything that I do. I always love solving problems. So people bring me their problems, whether it's IT related or not, all the time, to help talk through and problem solve. So let's do it.
Absolutely. Then that's the second collaboration probably of the scene then.
Yeah.
Perfect then, Rob. So Rob, I mean, this is the favorite part which I really wanted to ask you. I have been part of it, and you've invited me, and I had a great time. Getting involved in those activities and meeting a lot of new people. So I think I want to do more. Now, for our listeners, I want to just bring this up that Rob has started a very fascinating initiative called the Toastmasters, and he's the president of it. Now, Rob, I mean, our listeners might be asking me, Akhil, what exactly is a Toastmaster? So how would you, like to, familiarize like what exactly is the organization about and the genesis, like how did you first get involved in it and what are the experiences that you have gained from, being part of it, and how have you applied those policies or let's say those postulates in your IT field work?
So first, let's give our listeners an understanding of what Toastmasters is. And you're very kind when you say that there's this initiative that I've built, but I am the president of a club called GOTO Toastmasters. It's a club based in Melbourne, which is targeted and aimed at tech professionals and business professionals who might need to do public speaking or present better or have leadership roles within an organization. But we're part of a wider organization, and we're part of the Toastmasters International not-for-profit education organization. The goal of Toastmasters, in my view, is to help people get better at communication, leadership, and public speaking is a component of that as well. But it builds people's confidence to be able to speak and communicate effectively in small settings or in large settings when you're standing on stage. I've talked about in my history the things that I've done, how I have attended meetups and presented my concepts at conference stages, delivering training or working with ski clients and teaching people how to ski. So communication has always been a really important part of what I've needed to do in my life. When I became a consultant, very early on in my consulting life, I was standing in the kitchen at my office, and someone came up to me because they'd heard that I go to lots of meetups and they'd heard that I had spoken at meetups. And so they wanted to know whether I knew about Toastmasters. And I was standing there in the kitchen, buttering some bread, and I looked down at the bread and went, well, toast, like I am a master of toast and eating and making toast, but I don't know what this thing is called Toastmasters that you're talking about. So they said to me, Rob, come along to a meeting, come and understand what Toastmasters is and what you get out of Toastmasters beyond just making a really great lunch. And so I did. I went along to my first meeting and I listened to these people talking. The way a Toastmasters meeting works, there's some formalities to it for sure, but there's also a lot of structure that guides people through. And there's a training mechanism built in from the overlying Toastmasters International organization. And the intention and the design behind it is to provide a safe space for people to practice the skills that they need to speak in public, whether that's standing up at a wedding and giving a speech, whether it's giving a eulogy at a funeral, whether it's giving a reading or saying something at a birthday, a toast. The idea is that everyone in their life will have these moments where they're going to have to stand up and they're going to have to speak. And if
Yeah.
you haven't practiced those skills, it makes it really difficult. Toastmasters gives you the opportunity across 3 different components of a meeting to do that. So within a Toastmasters meeting, you have your prepared speeches, where someone takes time to go through a training module provided online, learn how to do something, and then presents and prepares a speech based on the skills that they learn. The second part of the meeting is impromptu speeches. That's where we have a table topics master who asks a
Yeah.
question, and you have no planning, no preparation, and you're put on the spot to go, now I've got to give a 2-minute speech on this question that someone's given me, and being able to have the confidence in yourself to structure that, much in the same way as I'm on the fly structuring some of the answers to these questions with you. So those skills apply in various parts of life. Whenever you're asked a question, being able to communicate your thoughts effectively is a skill that you learn through this impromptu speaking. The third part of Toastmasters is evaluation. The ability to stand there, to talk to a room of people or to a small cohort of people around you, and to get evaluation and feedback about the things that you did and the things that you didn't do well, gives you the ability to improve and grow. And I've always had this growth mindset, this way of looking at what I do and how I do it and how I can improve on it so that I get better at doing these things over time. Think back to my early days as a service desk analyst, solving a problem so that I don't have to solve the same problem 2 or 3 or 4 times. I do it once, I write a script for the second time, and the third and the fourth time, it just happens. So this iteration applies. When I deliver a speech, I want to learn something. I want to apply that knowledge, that feedback. So when I give the next speech, that's all built as part of it. And Toastmasters provides the structure for people to do that. I still to this day, and I said it to you as well, said, you should come along as a hark back to that original conversation I had thinking about Toast. And so this GOTO Toastmasters club that I'm the president of, I founded the club because I was leaving the company that I was going to Toastmasters with, and a number of my Toastmaster friends had also left the company and moved on to other things. And I wanted a way to maintain that connection, but I also wanted a way of expanding the network of people that were involved in Toastmasters. So myself and a friend decided, we sat down over a coffee and worked out what we thought the most important features were of a Toastmasters meeting for us to take to the public. We worked out who our target audience was, people who might need to speak at breakfast events or who might need to present at meetups, consultants who would have to stand in front of their clients and present a sales pitch or a product update. So we found the kind of sweet spot of professional people. We thought about the meetings that we'd been at previously that we enjoyed the most. And we came on this idea of having a dinner meeting once a month. Once a month because I have young kids, so I need to prioritize my time with the family. If I'm going to go out, and most Toastmasters clubs meet every other week, that's a lot of commitment to have 2 nights every month or more where you're out and away from the family. So I wanted to go, let me bundle all of it into one evening. If I'm out, I might as well go big, go out and have a long evening of it. So we have dinner once a month, which meant I got to sit down and share food with my friends and my colleagues and catch up about the different things that they were doing, while at the same time being in this environment and atmosphere where we could grow each other's leadership skills and communication skills through honest feedback and collaboration. And that's really what a Toastmasters group is about. And as part of forming and chartering my own club, my own Toastmasters club, that gave me opportunities to then become an area director and work with other clubs. And there's so many different clubs across Melbourne, across Australia, across the world. To this day, when I go to conferences in other cities, one of the first things I do when I know the dates that I'm going to be there is look at what Toastmasters clubs are operating and whether I can squeeze in a visit to their club to just meet another group of like-minded people who are all interested in learning and developing and growing their own skills, from communication skills as a one-to-one basis to standing in front of an audience and speaking at conferences. And I push people as I organize conferences and meetups to do both of those things, to learn skills through Toastmasters to improve the way they communicate.
That's brilliant. So would you like to, recommend our listeners to, join you for the Toastmasters? Like, I mean, it's not necessary that, they're based in Australia or let's say in India, but so even if they're based in different non-English speaking countries, do you think that they have a chance to be part of the Toastmasters?
Absolutely. Toastmasters is a worldwide organization. There are clubs everywhere around the world. And in fact, I reckon your listeners would be able to go to toastmasters.org to the Find a Club page and find a club close to where they are, where they'd be able to experience this for themselves. And you get to go to a meeting for your first time and see whether it aligns with your skills and your values and the way that you want to learn. And I always recommend to people, don't go to one Toastmasters meeting, go to 3 Toastmasters meetings, go to 3 different clubs and get a feel for each of those clubs. Work out which club is closest to you when you're at work, work out which club is closest to you when you're at home, how it fits into your lifestyle, because that's the way of finding a club that you can be a member of and be a part of. With everything in life, the more you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it. So joining a club to improve your personal speaking skills, your confidence skills, your leadership skills. So people can go to these clubs and start learning about Toastmasters, but then take on roles of responsibility and leadership roles within the club, where they can become the treasurer for this non-profit organization of their local club, or they can help other members on their education pathways, or they could become the president of a club. There's no restrictions on who can be the president or treasurer in any of these clubs that people go to, but turning up and taking part is a really important part about building their local community presence. And I would say all of your listeners should do that at least once in their lifetime, is go to a Toastmasters club and see what it's like and see what value they can get out of it.
Awesome. That's completely like I mean, which year was this, Rob, when you just had the awakening that you were in your kitchen and you were just looking at your toast. I'm a master of the toast, and that's the Toastmasters thing. Like, which year was that in?
So I first joined Toastmasters in 2019.
Okay.
So 6 years
2019.
ago.
All right, that's not too long back, I would say.
No, and I was relatively late to it, I would have thought. I'd never heard of it before. And now it's a big part of who I am and what I do in life and the people that I speak to. I was already capable of standing in front of a room of people and giving a speech. I did a very impromptu speech for my own wedding speech. Instead of planning all the different things that I might want to say, I just spoke from the heart and was able to deliver well. But I've had plenty of practice over my life and doing the different things that I do to do that. I would recommend most people, they probably need help to be able to give their own wedding speech in that kind of manner, for sure.
That's a very good piece of inspirational thing here, Rob. Probably that's going to be applicable for me and for our listeners alike as well.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's perfect, Rob. Now, Rob, I mean, I've seen this. I've just gone through your LinkedIn profile and something caught my attention. And that was like, you have been involved with all these, with all these communities, let's say like, Cloud Native Sydney, the Cloud Native Melbourne. So I wanted to understand, like, how did these communities help you out so well? And why do you think they're so important? And what's the benefit that, being part of it has, led to the thing?
For sure. So I talked about my experience with Kubernetes and how I learned about Kubernetes. And there were multiple ways that I first started hearing about Kubernetes. One was through a podcast from the folks at Google, but another way was going to local meetups. Meetups are a way of you finding people talking about subjects that you want to listen to in your local community. And there's a lot of different tech meetups. Going to a meetup helps you start to find the technology that you're most interested in. And that leads you onto open source communities. So I talked about how Kubernetes is this open source thing. Without people putting into that community, there would be no such thing as Kubernetes. And so the CNCF are very big proponents of helping communities organize together. Cloud Native Melbourne is one example of that. And it's a way of bringing people in Melbourne together around this cloud native subject matter. Cloud Native Sydney, I got involved with because I was going to a conference in Sydney that was being run by the people who manage Cloud Native Sydney. And I got involved with them and I was talking to them about how we could build better collaboration. And at the end of the day, community is about finding your local niche and finding ways of connecting your local pocket with another local pocket and another local pocket to build worldwide global communities. Toastmasters is one of those global communities, and I find that I can go to different Toastmasters clubs and still be part of it, just like I can go to different cloud native organizations and communities and be able to fit in a really nice way. So I look at the Cloud Native Melbourne and Cloud Native Sydney and think about the conference that they organize. And I think I spoke to you having just got back from a Cloud Native Melbourne and Sydney conference called CloudCon.
Yeah.
And the big thing about CloudCon is that people attended, they listened to talks during the day, they networked and interacted in the corridors. They'd go out for dinner afterwards, they'd have drinks, they'd talk about different things. They'd talk about problems they were having at work and technologies, and were able to find so much common ground with each other. And people connected in a way that you only get to connect when you're in a community like that, where everyone has this shared set of values, and they were helping each other solve problems at work for each other without any expectation of payment or anything in return. Community is about the people that you're around, and going to events that have been organized by a community allows you to start building your own brand recognition within a community and find like-minded people that you can network with and engage with. So I strongly recommend as well, especially for your listeners who have been listening to the things that I've talked about Kubernetes and service meshes, and who want to learn more about those technologies, go to your local cloud native community, go to your local CNCF organization and community groups, and start talking to the people that are doing things in your area, because you'll learn best from the people around you. And volunteer to give talks at those meetups. You don't have to be an expert to be able to stand there in front of a room and share your experience. And the more people's experience that we hear within a community organization, the better it is for everyone in the community. That variety, that interest level, and the different points of view that you can get across, it's a great way of bringing everyone together to talk about things.
Absolutely, absolutely, Rob. In fact, Rob, coincidentally, I had been part of just one particular, let's say, a web, or let's say an online cloud native group session. And that was actually organized by, I actually met this gentleman, in one of the events, and his name is Tiago Shimada. So I met him and I was just part of one particular thing. And after that, I don't know. I mean, he got a bit busy with his, other commitments, and so did I. But yeah, I just wanted to collaborate. And yeah, it was a pretty nice one.
Tiago is amazing. He has so much love and passion, and Tiago and I coordinate Cloud Native Melbourne together. He was doing a lot of work with K8Sug, which was the Kubernetes user group community in Melbourne, who have had a bit of a rebranding and talk about more than just Kubernetes now. So I think they've renamed themselves to KSUG AI. But Tiago was driving that community as well. What I tend to find is that when you find someone who's heavily involved in community, they're not just involved in one community group. They're spreading themselves across multiple different community groups. And I found as I've got more engaged and more involved in it, I end up doing the same thing. So I work with colleagues in Auckland, and whenever I go to Auckland, I help them organize
Yeah.
Kubernetes Auckland meetups. So I get involved in the Auckland community, and I get involved in the Sydney community, and I get involved in the Melbourne community and various different meetup groups. And you see the same people turning up to a lot of these different places, supporting each other and helping each other and being there for new initiatives that come together. So Tiago is one of the faces that I see regularly, and I'm always enlightened by seeing him.
Amazing. That's good. Now, I mean, Rob, I mean, you're just familiar of this fact that, everywhere in YouTube or let's say on Instagram Reels, there is always this particular thing called manifestation going on. Everyone just thinks a particular thing and they feel that, and within 5 years or let's say in 3 years, I want to get this. So on a manifestation note, let's say which is out of syllabus here, or let's say on a very hypothetical note, Rob, I would just like to ask you, let's say suppose the tech person of a famous Barclays Premier League team comes to you, or let's say or a tech person of an AFL team comes to you, and he says, Rob, I want you to, help me out with the tech side with respect to Kubernetes. Then how would you, like to assist him, and what are the things that you would first look at, and how would you train them?
For sure. So manifestation is a really powerful way of looking at something, seeing how you want it to be in the future, and getting into that headspace. I get to do this all the time when people come to me and talk about Kubernetes, whether at meetups or on the plane or at conferences or through the work that I do as a consultant. The way and the approach that I have all of the time is to understand the outcome, to understand someone's end goal and what they're looking to achieve. What does success look like? And as soon as you understand what success looks like, you can then start backtracking through how you might achieve success and the steps and the goals that you're going to take to get to that. Now, if a tech person is coming to me and saying, get me to Kubernetes, that's the wrong outcome. Kubernetes is a way of delivering an outcome. It's not the outcome itself. DevOps is a way of getting to the outcomes that you want, but you still have to assess what your priorities are, what your business objectives are, and what your technological maturity is. So anyone that talks to me about this, we start understanding what the end goal is, what the outcome that they're looking for is. And then we step our way through about how they might achieve that and what technologies and tools might best support them in achieving their outcome. To get training on how to do that depends on where they're lacking. And if you think about my head, I'm a very visual person, right? So I think about the outcome as being up here. And I think about where people start as being down here. And there's going to be a trajectory all the way up and down to get to where they're going to go. The tools and technologies that they need to support them at all the different points along that pathway, from the lowest point of where they're starting to the highest point of where they want to achieve. And different tools and technologies will support them more or less depending on what they choose. So understanding where they are now and where they're going to get to gives you the ability to suggest tools and technologies that they can use as stepping stones along the way to get to that end goal, especially when you're thinking about a 3 to 5 year objective that they're trying to achieve. So I start there. And then when it comes down to training, someone asked me at the weekend, they said to me, Rob, we've just done the CTF. I couldn't do very well at it. I don't really know Kubernetes that well. What should I do? How do I get to know Kubernetes better?
Yeah.
And so I started talking to them. And I always think talking to someone, especially around the subject of what they're looking for, helps give you so much insight as to why they're trying to achieve what they're trying to achieve. And they said, oh, I didn't understand what you were talking about with Grafana there. And I said, well, Grafana isn't Kubernetes, but it's an associated technology that you might need to think about and understand. So start to understand, if you're focused on learning about Kubernetes, understand the ecosystem that Kubernetes sits within. That cloud native ecosystem is massive. There are so many different tools and technologies in it. But if you pick the ones that you're most interested in and find some basic free online learning about that, then you can start getting involved and start to read documentation. The best way I find of learning is to use. So find a way of pulling those tools and technologies in and practice using them. I said this earlier as well. I learned so much about Kubernetes by being thrust into the deep end and having to support a Kubernetes platform, the hardest possible way of running Kubernetes. But we had to understand what the components were that made it successful. And I give everyone that same advice of do the research and understand what you might be looking at, what the ecosystem is. Do the basic reading, then start utilizing it and using it, then start teaching other people about it. So
Exactly.
go to your local meetups, go to your communities, give a talk about what you've learned so far, because that process of communicating and sharing what you've learned is a way of solidifying it in your own brain, which means you've then got space to build on top of that, which helps you go from down here to up here as you keep building progressively more and more information. And eventually you'll end up becoming an expert.
Absolutely. Now, you had the experience of, working for the Australian government. And if you're given the task of, moving to the sports side, do you feel it's a bit different, or do you feel the process is the same for both of them?
I don't treat anyone differently when I start working with clients. They all have objectives and end goals that they need to achieve, and they all have limitations and restrictions around what they can or can't do to get to that. And so understanding how long processes might take or what tool chains might be in the way to enable or disable at times the way that you get to an end goal or an outcome. I find that the Australian government or any government around the world that I've worked with, and like the private enterprises, they might move slightly quicker or slightly slower at times. They'll have different objectives that they're trying to achieve, but everyone is trying to improve and get to a better end result than where they currently are at. And it's my job to support them getting there in the most efficient way possible.
That's brilliant, Rob. Now, Rob, before we actually come to a close, or let's say conclude our podcast session, we'll take a pretty lighter route. At this moment, Rob, I was just bombarding you with the questions of, let's say, the timeline of your journey, about Kubernetes, about Toastmasters. Now, I'll take a lighter route in the form of a rapid fire round, which is nothing technical, but it's just going to be your likes and interests. So, so up for the first question in the rapid fire round, Rob. So, Rob, if I would just like to ask you this, like, what is your favorite sports team? Then what would you tell it?
My favorite sports team, especially at the moment, is the McLaren F1 sports team. They have a team of an Australian and a British driver. They're doing exceptionally well, and I've been supporting them for a while. So it's a good team to be following right now.
Awesome, awesome. So, what is your favorite street food, and what would that be?
My heritage is Italian, so I would say my
Oh,
favorite
okay.
street food is pizza.
Oh, so you have the Italian heritage, Rob. I mean, I thought you were like, you're British, and that's a surprise for me. Nice, that's really good.
I have a very complicated background. I was born in England to an English father and a mother from Scotland, born to an Italian mother and Ukrainian father. So I have this
Oh,
complicated mix of heritage that comes down into me. And then obviously I'm no longer in England. I've now moved to Australia, and I call myself an Australian. So I'm an Australian, Englishman, Italian, Ukrainian. It's all there, but it's all part of my makeup. And so I have a love of pizza and I have a love of pasta, and definitely the best street food, easy to eat, is a large slice of Napolese pizza.
amazing. That's good to know. Now, Rob, do you speak a little bit of Italian since you have, the Italian heritage to you?
Akil, I went to a market a couple of weekends ago, and my mum introduced me to one of the vendors who was selling Italian cakes and sweet pastries. And immediately, this lovely old Italian woman started talking to me in Italian. My understanding of Italian is, acceptable at the best of times. Being able to reply and respond was so far beyond my language skills. I
Okay.
speak English, and unfortunately, that's probably the only language that I'm fluent in. But I did learn Italian and French as a kid. So I have these snippets of things that I can remember
Snippets,
and I
okay.
can say. I wouldn't say I'm able to speak those languages at all.
All right, all right. That totally sums up the point. Now, Rob, I would just since I'm Indian, I want to ask you personally that what is your favorite Indian dish, and what would you rate that to be?
So it's very difficult for me. having come from the UK and having vindaloos and tindaloo curries frequently, I know that those aren't Indian dishes at all. They were founded in Birmingham. So I used to work with someone who would take me to their favorite Indian restaurants and try to introduce me to various different curries. But I think a masala curry is probably my favorite Indian dish.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things in Indian food. Let's say, Rob, suppose I hang out with you and meet you, I would definitely introduce you to more Indian food and, you'll definitely like it.
Yeah, and I love seeing cultures from around the world. I remember backpacking through Malaysia once, and I had arrived having slept in youth hostels and campgrounds for 2 weeks, and I splurged and got myself a hotel room. I was walking the local street market, bumped into someone, got talking, and they said to me, "Rob, this isn't the part of Malaysia that you really want to see. If you want to see Malaysia, you've got to get on the bus and you've got to go out to the jungles and the forests and
Mhm.
see what else is going on. If you
Exactly.
want, I can take you and I can show you my home village." So we got on a bus and traveled for 3 or 4 hours by bus. I ended up sleeping on a mat in their house. And in the morning, they woke me up with this amazing smelling dish of garlic frying and rice frying inside a wok. And I had the most amazing food and got to experience different parts of the culture. Being able to find a person and someone who can introduce you to culture is a much better way of experiencing it than just turning up in the tourist restaurants and ordering something that you can understand or pronounce.
Exactly. That's the most authentic way. And, they know it better than anyone else in that particular place.
Yeah, I don't like to make decisions or choices when I'm in a different country and someone's taking me out for dinner. It's like, no, you just feed me what you think you want to eat, and I will jump on board and try it all.
Okay. Since we just got the concept of, let's say, the topic of Malaysia here, I want to go a little more further. I want to understand, Rob, since you have traveled the world, like what is your favorite holiday destination and what would what would that be?
I have two minds here. So we've talked about me being a ski instructor. And so as a holiday destination, there are two places in the world that I would go for a cold weather holiday. And that is Banff, Alberta in Canada, where I was a ski instructor. The weather was amazing. It was cold. It was -degrees. There was beautiful light snow. Amazing. Queenstown, and particularly Cardrona in New Zealand, comes very
Mm.
close to me. The scenery and the atmosphere in New Zealand is such an amazing place, and I love being in the mountains and doing adventure sports like mountain biking and skiing and all those things. But at the same time, there's the relaxing side of me. So Rarotonga, which is where I got married, is probably one of the most de-stressing, relaxing places I could imagine going to. Lying on a beach, beautiful, clear water, sandy sand everywhere, and just a nice, consistent, warm weather. That for me would be probably the best holiday vacation to de-stress.
Awesome. I think I have to keep that in my bucket list now. All right. Okay. The final question to you, Rob. So, Rob's in the starting when the podcast session just kicked off, you just were taking me back to that time where you were just invested and interested in playing video games. Now, I want you to just tell me what is your favorite video game and what would you name it?
Yeah, this is hilarious because I've had this checkered history with video games. While I loved playing Prince of Persia and Lemmings, I never really got stuck into video games. I remember playing Counter-Strike when I was at school, using the Unreal Tournament engine. And since then, I've probably only played Need for Speed and Grand Theft Auto, and that would be the only games in my history that I've ever played. Instead of playing games, I'd much rather a board game. Settlers of Catan is probably the board game that I would pick if I wanted to play a game.
All right, that's perfect. Even I'm not much into video games, but the game that I really like the most is EA Sports FIFA. And I have been a huge FIFA fan like since years. And I mean, since I'm a huge football fan myself, so that's pretty much close to my heart. And yeah.
Yeah, very good. Yeah.
All right. So I'll just add one more question to this, to our session, and the final one, I promise. So, Rob, I wanted to understand, like, who is your favorite musical artist, or let's say musical band, that you love hearing always?
See, I have such an eclectic taste in music, from hardcore rock with bands like Breaking Benjamin to very country-esque The Eagles. I love listening to country and folk singers. So the original Taylor Swift, I probably would surprise people by being a big Swiftie still.
Okay, that's a pretty unique choice, Rob. So, Rob, finally, thank you so much for taking time and being part of my podcast initiative. The genesis of our collaboration goes way back, probably in a cafe, and where we got down and we were discussing things. That was a first of a kind for me, meeting you in person, and I just had a great time, brainstorming the ideas, even for a shorter time, but it was really wonderful, and here we are. It's a mission successful from my end, and from your end as well.
It's been a really enlightening journey for me as well, seeing how you make the podcasts and formulate the questions and identify what your audience might want to hear. It's been really insightful to see that. Thanks, Akil.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rob. So, Rob, the basic thing that actually caught my attention here was, I mean, your let's say your inclination towards Kubernetes and all the other technologies. So I feel I have to go back and just understand more about Kubernetes. And yeah, it was so insightful, and I just love the conversation. It just completely around it and your journey. So thank you so much once again, Rob. So listeners, before we actually conclude our podcast session, this is your host Akhil Lavluri signing off. We would be back with another podcast episode with another eminent industry leader very soon. Till then, keep listening. Take care, stay tuned, goodbye, and au revoir. Thank you.